So as you wind down your mantra meditation, you can take your attention back to your breath. Deep, nourishing breaths, and with palms folded by your chest. And offer thanks for a little bit of self-care time or me time we've given ourselves today. Okay. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. Okay, so we'll pick back up with text or with chapter 6. We're going to try to cover the entire chapter 6 today. Chapter 6 has 47 verses, as opposed to chapter 5 that had 29 verses. Chapter 5 is one of the smaller chapters in the Gita. It's, I think, the second smallest chapter. After chapter 12 is the smallest chapter with only 20 verses. So chapter 6 is 47. It's, it's slightly larger than the average. And chapter 6 largely speaks about the mind, or more specifically, it speaks about dhyana yoga process. The yoga of meditation. So every chapter ends with the name yoga. Like the first chapter was called Arjuna Vishada Yoga, or the yoga of lamentation, or the yoga of anxiety, or the yoga of dejection. So that's chapter 1. Then chapter 2 was Sankhya Yoga, which is the yoga of understanding the difference between body and the mind, and the self, finally, the soul. And then each chapter has a name of yoga. So chapter 3 was Karma Yoga. Chapter 4 was Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge. Chapter 5, I forget the yoga name, but it's chapter 5 is Karma Yoga, further elaborated. And now in chapter 6, it's titled Dhyana Yoga, or the yoga of meditation. This Dhyana Yoga is also synonymous with what's called Ashtanga Yoga, or the eightfold, or the eight-limbed, eight-part yoga process. This Dhyana Yoga is one of 4 major yoga paths. So recapping, the first, or the beginning stage of the yoga process, is called Karma Yoga, or yoga that one engages in by trying to do detached work, where you try not to be, attached to the results. You detach from the results, but you do your work, do your duty. That's the beginning part. Then one moves to the next rung of the yoga ladder called Jnana Yoga, or the yoga of knowledge, where you try to study existential questions like, who am I? And is there a spiritual realm beyond the world we're living in? And things like that. So that's Jnana Yoga. Then after that comes the next stage, or the next yoga, which is this one, Dhyana Yoga, or Ashtanga Yoga. This yoga process is very difficult. We'll see how it's described by Krishna, but it's very intricate, and it's focused on meditation. That's the primary means. It's internal meditation is the essence of this yoga process. And then finally, the fourth most common yoga process is Bhakti Yoga, or the yoga of devotion, the yoga of love, the yoga of gratitude, the yoga of forgiveness, the yoga of affection. That's Bhakti Yoga. Okay, with that said, we're going to dive into this yoga meditation. As you can imagine, because it's all about meditation, much of the chapter is about our dear friend, the mind. For those of us who were at the Gita Nagari Body, Mind, Spirit retreat, you will see a number of slides that you probably have seen before, because one of the topics at the Body, Mind, Spirit retreat was understanding the unbridled mind that we have. And so, and much of the content was from chapter 6 of the Gita. Look at that. So we're actually going to review some of the content that we went through at the Body, Mind, Spirit retreat. So in chapter 5, Krishna says, Arjuna, be a yogi. And here we can see Arjuna thinking a yogi means somebody who's in a forest somewhere, isolated, a monk maybe. And at the same time, Krishna is saying, fight. It's like, what? That's like a conundrum. I mean, the picture of a yogi is someone sitting in the Himalayas meditating on becoming lighter than feather or what have you. And here you want me to get into a gruesome warfare? That doesn't make any sense. So Krishna understands this dilemma that Arjuna is dealing with because he asks it twice. Already in beginning of chapter 3 and in the beginning of chapter 5, Arjuna doesn't seem to have the same understanding of yoga as Krishna. And Krishna tried to explain it. Arjuna didn't get it. He asked it again in chapter 5. And Krishna, recognizing that Arjuna still doesn't get it, he's further elaborating in chapter 6. So what we can appreciate in the Gita is that a relationship between a aspiring spiritualist and the teacher is one of patience and kindness and compassion. And it's also one of deepening inquiry as the relationship progresses. So Arjuna keeps inquiring until he gets it. And then at the end of the Gita, he says, I got it. Krishna said, I can explain the whole thing again if you want me to. And Arjuna said, nah, I got it. I'm ready to fight. In yoga, I'm ready to do this. So that's the relationship between a teacher and a student in spiritual subject matters. Compassionate and even repeated, perhaps looking at the same subject matter from different angles of vision, as you might look at a piece of diamond from different angles and you can see it glow in different ways and appreciate the charm of the diamond as the light shines from different facets of the diamond. Similarly, these spiritual subjects and the Gita, the message of the Gita, can be seen from different angles of vision and to gain better understanding and to gain deep appreciation for the message and be able to apply it. So that said, Krishna now understands Arjuna is still struggling with this dilemma between inaction as a yogi in solitude versus action on the battlefield. So in the very beginning, the first verse of chapter 6, Krishna says, the Sanskrit is there, anashrita karma phalam karyam karma karoti ha sa sannyasi cha yogi cha nanira agni na chakriya, which means one who is unattached to the fruits of his work, so you're detached, and one who works as he's obligated, is in the renounced order of life. And he's a true yogi or a mystic, not he who lights no fire and performs no duty. Meaning, the takeaway is, a monk and a detached worker have the same spiritual position. So Krishna's actually trying to get Arjuna to go deeper than external activity. In other words, spirituality is not about what you do externally. It's not about the clothes you wear. A monk wears robes, right? It's not about the clothes you wear. It's not about whether you're married or not, whether you have a family. It's not about how much knowledge you might have even. But what Krishna is saying here, a true monk and a person who's truly detached, meaning they have a heart that's purified or deeply connected, they have the same spiritual position. It's got nothing to do with the outside perception that we might have. So a mother offering water to their child can be equally spiritual if done in the right consciousness than a monk meditating in a forest somewhere. So this idea of monkhood in the Vedic understanding, or the Gita is described, there's different phases of our lives. The first phase is the first quarter of our life is intended to be a student life. The second quarter is married life. The third quarter is retired life. And the last quarter is intended to be a full focus on spiritual life, which is monkhood, or generally known as sannyas. So yoga today is a small part of this Ashtanga or Dhyana yoga process. So you see, there's 8 processes that are described here, starting with the do's, niyama, the don'ts. These are both prerequisites before actually getting into what's called asanas, or the sitting postures, and pranayam, or control of life air. After that comes withdrawing of the senses, meaning isolating oneself. Then 3 stages of deepening meditation: dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Samadhi means where you have reached the perfection of meditation, you're completely absorbed. Most people, I was just hearing a talk on yoga. Yoga, by the way, is an $88 billion industry globally. That's a huge industry. People have made it a commercial name, yoga, based on these 2 processes of postures and life airs. It's not so much even life airs or the control of life airs, pranayam, breath control, and all that. Mainly the postures. It's so sad because the first 2 are missing. It's been a cultural appropriation of the word yoga. And it's, one time I was serving as a chaplain at Washington University in St. Louis, and the student body invited me to be part of a panel to speak about the cultural appropriation of yoga, which means the whole world has taken this ancient tradition and made money out of it. $88 billion industry. And it's not doing it right either. It's just doing the sitting postures, missing the first 2 parts. So people take the side benefits of this yoga process as the intended benefit of the yoga process, which is the side benefit is health. People do it for health. But that's not the purpose. The purpose of the asanas is to have deepening mind control so you can enter into these more advanced stages of meditation to finally realize your spiritual essence and the super soul in the heart. That's what it's intended to do, but people miss it. So now you've got, because it's got such commercial value, you go from the normal sitting postures to goat yoga, hot yoga, laughing yoga, beer yoga. I don't know if you guys have heard of beer yoga. I guess you have beer every time you finish one pose, you take a sip of beer and you do another. I mean, it's like, it's been really, a swimming yoga. I've seen that too, where you put your yoga mat on a pool and you do yoga somehow in the pool. So again, it's yoga is a small part of the yoga eightfold yoga system, and it's also misunderstood and misapplied. And so today we're going to get like the authentic, the Gita version of what this yoga process is. So another view of the Ashtanga yoga process. On top here, you have the 8 steps that we went through in the previous stage. So here are the 5 yamas and the 5 niyamas, the do's and the don'ts. So ahimsa, not violent, being truthful, not stealing, have sense control, not being possessive, having purity and cleanliness, etc., etc., etc. So these are all preliminary processes to get to the asanas, the yoga postures, then moving into pranayam, then moving into withdrawal of the senses of being isolated, then concentration, meditation, and finally spiritual absorption. Now the picture on the right, while the person does seem spiritually absorbed, It doesn't look very attractive. It seems a little emaciated. But it doesn't mean that one is emaciated. That's just a picture in this slide. So continuing on, so Krishna tells Arjuna, if you're on the beginner stage of the yoga process, if you're in like the top, you could say 5 or 6 stages of the Eightfold Yoga process, that you continue to work. And as you become absorbed in meditation, that's when you're in an advanced stage and one doesn't have to do one's regular duties of life, like go to work, for example. So there's technical terms for it. When in a perhaps immature stage or advancing stage, it's called yoga arurukshu. You're kind of like still practicing, still getting understanding of how to get into meditation. And then yoga rudha is where one is very mature. At that stage, one can certainly give up. So he's basically telling Arjuna, you're not qualified to just give up the battlefield and go and go to the forest. You can't do that. You're not at that stage yet. So then Arjuna, wonders, okay, how am I going to work out my mind to become you could say, ready to enter into this meditation process. So now Krishna goes on to discuss the mind. So for the next several slides, it's all about the mind. So he says, one must deliver, thoughtfully, think about this, one must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is a friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. So if you've been able to conquer your mind is your friend. If you can't conquer your mind is the greatest enemy. Have you ever considered that we're living 24/7, potentially, if we have an uncontrolled mind? We're potentially living with the greatest enemy right in the same body. This with us all the time. There was a movie many years ago. It was called Sleeping with the Enemy. I don't know if any of you saw that. But we're basically sleeping with the enemy. It's the mind. Here are the 6 enemies that make up the mind to be uncontrolled. It's material desire or lust, anger, greed, illusion, pride, and envy. These are things that take us away from the real goal of life. They are tragic expressions. All of these are tragic expressions of our unfulfilled connection with the Supreme. I like this image. The heaviest burdens we carry are the thoughts in our heads. It feels like that sometimes. The stresses or the anxieties, it almost feels like we need this kind of support. Some other interesting pictures about the mind not being in control, whether it be crime. I like this couch potato. It's literally a potato. Overeating. Social media, or Facebook as a pill. Dopamine pill. So Krishna goes on to say, if you have a controlled mind, then you can have peace. For one who's controlled the mind, the super soul is reached. We connected with who we really are and the self within. He's become tranquil, and such a man is steady now. Happiness or distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor, it's all the same. Doesn't feel like that right now. If somebody insults us versus somebody appreciates us, it doesn't feel the same, does it? honor and dishonor. It just doesn't. But for one who's actually in contact through this yoga process, contact with the super soul, for them it's the same, honor and dishonor. In fact, they see honor as poison because that honor is just going to inflame my pride. And they see dishonor as sweetness or nectar because now I have opportunity to learn how to improve. So going further, this such a person, I'm showing rocks on one side and a diamond on the other side. They see everything equally. Pebbles, stone, or gold is the same. I marvel at some of these billboards that advertise for buying jewelry for one significant other. You know, they say, have a happy relationship, get a diamond for her. You know, it doesn't work that way. I wish it was that easy. You just buy a diamond and the relationship's happy. It doesn't work that way. But what those billboards indicate is that people value precious gems so much more than they would a pebble or a stone. But for a person of self-realization, they see it the same. Pebble, stone, or gold, or diamond, it's all the same. It's matter, kind of configured a certain way today, and that same matter is going to be configured a different way tomorrow. Not only things, now this is even deeper when your mind has become so controlled, you see not just things and material objects with the same equal vision, but you also see people. It's harder to see people with equal vision than it is to see material objects with equal vision. So a person is considered still further advanced when he regards honest well-wishers, affectionate benefactors, the neutral parties, the mediators, the envious folks, our friends, our enemies, the pious and the sinful, all with an equal mind. I really like this picture. I've used it so many times. You know, this affection between a dove and a monkey. Like these are completely opposite kinds of animals. And when you think about it, you know, especially in the United States, it's called a melting pot, isn't it? Because you have all kinds of different backgrounds and cultures and languages and ways of eating and ways of talking and what people consider to be rude versus consider to be nice, right? It's so interesting to observe. I mean, I'm a connoisseur of, I would say, cultural differences and how people like respond to when you make a phone call, right? Some people take it as an offense of intruding into my day. First text me to see if I'm available before you try to call me. Versus some others would love to receive a phone call spontaneously. Oh, wow, you're actually thinking about me. Thank you, and it's just a cultural difference. But for a yogi who's very advanced, they see it all the same, or all with an equal mind. They treat people differently, but they see them as essentially spirit soul within that's animating the body, and they have behaviors and so forth that are just simply conditionings of the past and have nothing to do with their true self. All right, so that's a quick run through of the first 10 verses of the 6th chapter, where Krishna explains about the mind and progressive stages of mind control. Now he says, okay, how do you practice the yoga process? Now, we've talked about the do's and the don'ts, the yamas and the niyamas, the asanas and the pranayam, the yoga postures and the breath control. Now, how do you practice the last 4 steps of the dhyana yoga, the yoga of meditation? And this is where Krishna begins from text 10 to text 26, I believe, is detailed instruction of how to practice this yoga process. First is to the seat. Asana means the seat, the kind of seat that you have. It's a kusha grass. It's in the forest. It's covered with deer skin and a soft cloth, not too high, not too low. By the way, do you know why deer skin? Does anyone know why you sit on deer skin in the forest? Because when you sit on deer skin, it keeps some of the reptiles away, like scorpions and snakes and things like that. So, not that any of you will, but maybe you will. If you ever choose to meditate in the forest sometime, get some deer skin. It might do you good so you don't have reptiles all over you. Keeping your body, neck, and a head in a straight line. Having a proper place which is clean, pure, secluded. And then how to meditate with the mind controlled. One is fearless and celibate. No, it is really important for many of the other yoga processes like jnana yoga or the yoga of knowledge and dhyana yoga, the yoga meditation, to be celibate. It's a prerequisite. In bhakti, however, celibacy is not a requirement. It's not a prerequisite. Controlled senses, yes, but complete celibacy is not absolutely necessary. But to be successful in this yoga process, one does have to be celibate. Clean means taking a shower. So cleaning the body and then cleaning the mind through mantra. And that keeps the body and mind clean. And secluded usually means like a holy place in a forest, where one's mind naturally can go to some kind of spiritual subject. Like when we went Gita Nagari for the BMS retreat, it was probably so much easier for some of us to meditate there than it is on our own houses, isn't it? Because you're in a remote environment, you're secluded, it's in an auspicious place, and so forth. So these are the basic practices. I'll take our attention, this slide has a little bit to it, but I'll just bring our attention to text 17, where our Krishna says that one should be regulated in their eating, sleeping, working, and recreation to be free from miseries and to properly practice yoga. And Krishna specifically says, don't eat too much. That's pretty clear, because if you eat too much, you want to sleep and you can't really focus on your meditation. But he also says, don't eat too little. Similarly, don't sleep too much, but don't sleep too little. Sleeping too little can actually impact our health. If your health is not in order, then one cannot properly engage in the yoga process. So generally, the yoga texts talk about sleep. In the Gita, Prabhupada comments that one needs 6 hours of sleep, and that's it. Other places of the Bhakti Yoga text, it discusses that you need somewhere between 6 and 8 hours of sleep, depending on the person. And what are some eating habits that make it regulated and make it balanced? First is having it at fixed times of day. Second is to eat only when you're hungry also. That if it's fixed times of day, the more important than fixed time of day is the fact that you should be hungry, otherwise don't eat. In Ayurveda, a branch of medicine from the ancient India, talks about the fact that many diseases stem from overeating or not proper eating habits. So eating only when we're hungry, and eating up to 50 to 75% of the tummy needs to be full. Fill the rest 25 with water and the rest 25 with air, so that it can mix the juices of the there's enough air to mix the juices of the food as it's broken down in the stomach. So these are simple recommendations of how to have regulated eating and sleeping, and then working and recreation. There should be recreation even in a yogi's life. Now, for some who may not have necessarily some exercise to their life, minimally walking. The great sages discuss that this recreation that Krishna brings up in the Gita is related to walking. Just going on long walks is very nourishing and helpful. It's recreational, or it's recreate. It's to recreate the mental energy and the physical energy to continue one's yoga practice. So we see the principle of balance is also presented in the Gita, along with deep spiritual subject matters. So we're coming towards the end of the first section, which is the first half of the 6th chapter. Arjuna is thinking, how is the mind of a perfected yogi? And Krishna says, their mind is just as a lamp in a windless place does not waver. Very fixed consciousness. It's nice to observe children. I don't know if you've ever seen how children's minds work, but they focus on one thing for very short periods of time, and they can't have too much attention span, and immediately their minds go to something else, and their minds go to something else. Even when children go through things like grief, like if they've lost somebody in the family, how you deal with like a 5-year-old versus a 15-year-old or a 25-year-old with grief is very different. While it's certainly true that they also grieve, like a 5-year-old, their attention span is so short that they look, at one moment they are very dejected, and the next moment they can be like everything's normal and happy and jolly and childlike. So when we look at the workings of a child, a 5-year-old kid, it can resemble our inner workings. When we not react so quickly to our mind's dictates like a child might, but our mind also works similarly. But what Krishna is saying here is that a yogi's mind is like a lamp in a windless place. It's sharp, powerful, strong. It doesn't move. And then what are some symptoms of a person at this stage who has reached Samadhi, or that the last stage of the eightfold yoga process? These are all the symptoms. They experience complete restraint. They can see the self with a pure mind. They relish and rejoice in the self. They experience boundless transcendental happiness. They think there's nothing greater than what they've achieved. They never depart from that truth. And even in the greatest difficulty, they're never shaken. And thus they're free from all miseries of life. This is a 7-part marketing campaign for the yoga process, guys. This is what you get. Yeah, and so then Krishna says, that's the perfection. So now how do you practice? How do you get there? He says you have to practice with determination and conviction. And I'm going to go to the next slide. Very important verse. As we practice meditation, from wherever and whenever the mind wanders due to its flickering and unsteady nature, bring it back, withdraw it from what it was thinking about, and bring it back under the control of the self. So we might think that something has fallen in our lives, it's not working, our mind has kind of gone astray. Bring it back. Like an expert horseman grabs the reins of a wild horse, grab the reins of the mind. As soon as we've recognized it's deviated, grab the reins and bring it back under the control of the self. This, in essence, dear friends, this slide, in essence, is the takeaway from the entire 6th chapter. as we practice yoga. Wherever the mind goes, just with determination and conviction and inner quest for spiritual realization, bring it back under the control of the self. This is a story of determination. I'm going to skip it because of time, well, maybe I'll tell it really quickly. What happens is it's a mystic story. It's one of the ancient stories that seem a little improbable, but it's interesting. It tells a message. There's a sparrow. You see a little sparrow? It laid eggs right next to the shore of the ocean. The ocean, with its waves, naturally took the eggs away. Now the sparrow gets really angry at the ocean and says, "Give me my eggs back. If not, I'm going to drink you up." And there's this bird carrier of Krishna known as Garuda, as you see here. This bird carrier heard about this little bird trying to drink the ocean. And so he was amused and came and saw this little bird trying to drink the ocean. And then he threatened the ocean and said, "Give the eggs back. If not, I will drink you up." And so then the ocean returned the bird's eggs back. So what do you think the sparrow, the ocean, and Garuda, the bird carrier of Vishnu, represent? Any thoughts? To catch you guys off guard. You're in listening mode, and all of a sudden I'm asking you to be in speaking mode. Anyone?
Determination on the part of the sparrow.
Yeah. So what would they represent? What would the sparrow represent in our life?
Willpower?
Okay. Our willpower. You could say our mind or our soul. What would the ocean represent?
More like a universe.
Sure.
Is it the mind?
It could be material attraction. It could be things that taking us away from our cherished spiritual goals. You know, things like more money, more, stuff.
And endless material stuff. Yep.
This material stuff could be all the ocean trying to. And what would Garuda represent?
So
By the
in
way,
this case,
yeah, go ahead.
the Garuda helped the sparrow. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking like the yogic tradition.
The yogic tradition could be Garuda. Yeah.
Is it the God's protection?
God's protection, God's help, as we're trying to do something really impossible, that is control our minds. Drink the ocean. By the little sparrow trying to drink the ocean, or for us to control our minds, they're probably equally improbable or impossible, that we might get help from Krishna or from God, and that help is a help of Garuda. But it required the sparrow to be intent and be determined. Otherwise, Garuda probably would not have come down to help. Garuda, by the way, is the official airlines for Indonesia, if you guys didn't know, which is interesting because you can see that Vedic culture actually spread far and wide besides Southeast Asia. It also, was in Indonesia. All right, so let's pause there for any questions or reflections, comments that you might have. I'm going to stop sharing. Then we'll pick back up with the second half.
If you're meditating and you're sitting on a deer skin, where does ahimsa come into that? Because that deer skin came from an animal, and you're sitting on it and you're trying to do something good for yourself.
Generally, these are skin that are taking off of dead animals. So the animal's already dead, and so now you use the skin for your meditation purpose. It's not that you kill the animal then use the skin.
All right, thanks.
Any other reflection? What were some main points that you picked up, or something that you heard that was maybe new for you or different? Perhaps something you liked?
Main point that I picked up, it's not necessarily so much that I like, but the idea of controlling the mind, how like, in Bhakti Yoga, we don't necessarily try to stop sense gratification, but we try to regulate it. And in that case, we try to purify ourselves.
So the piece of regulation, the eating, sleeping thingy, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, regulation. Because the examples you were given earlier were related to a little bit more, like this kind of like very extreme kind of yoga practices where like you don't necessarily associate yourself with any external forces.
Yeah.
You just pretty much meditating and without having any engaging in any kind of material satisfaction.
Yeah. So the regulation was more relatable, something that you could apply in your life as opposed to something.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I don't know if it's really more relatable in my life, but it's definitely more relatable than the other one.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely. You can say it's more relatable.
So when you're talking about yama and niyama, those are the basis of starting all of the yoga practices. How come if you don't practice those, the do's and don'ts, how can you progress forward to the higher up the ladder? I mean, it doesn't make no sense how these people are showing the asanas and breathing things without showing the do's and the don'ts. I don't get it.
Yeah, they don't. And so that's why the yoga process is not as beneficial, or it doesn't give the real benefit that it's intended to give. It'll give you good health. Some people practice yoga postures because it improves their sensual intimacy with partners and so forth. It's totally not what the yoga process was intended.
Right. Right, but I'm right by saying that you need to have those as basic, the building blocks, the foundation to move around through the other processes, right?
To be able to effectively engage with those processes, yes.
Correct. Okay. Just want to make sure.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, I'm thinking about your profession of dentistry, right? I mean, can someone work on another person's teeth without going through dentistry school?
No, they can't.
I mean, can they? I mean, like, physically, can they? Like,
Oh,
if,
of course they can. There's people who do it in the garages get caught all the time. But I mean, it's not the same.
that's my point. That's exactly what's going on. That has become an $88 billion industry.
Right. I got you.
I was gonna say, I think back in the day, the barbers used to take care of this situation.
Yeah. That's why they're red and white poles.
I can imagine they did a great job.
So
So I do have a question. Would you say that there is a difference between yoga and meditation? Because I feel like yoga is associated with like, well, the way, the majority sees it as action, as in, the poses and all that. But as you get further into the whole process, like samadhi and all that, that's more the meditation part of it. So they're two different, I believe they're two different things that really do interact with each other.
Yes. So yoga is defined as connection with the Supreme. Yug, the word yug in Sanskrit, from which yoga has come from, means to connect. The word yoke in English, are you familiar with the word yoke in English, where you yoke like ox to a cart or whatever like that?
Okay.
Yeah, so the word yoke comes from the Sanskrit word yug. So just as you would yoke an ox to a cart, yug or yoga is to connect the self to the source. We're all sourced from the Supreme. That's who we are. So the yoga is to make that connection, and there's different ways or different paths you can use to get to that connected space with the Supreme. Meditation helps in that. So meditation is a subset of this broader idea of yoga. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does.
All right. Any other thought or comment before we move on?
I was just gonna add kind of like, or maybe ask questions to what he just talked about. But these asanas, aren't they supposed to be actual meditation if done properly while
And
performing?
not necessary. No, they're not. They're not meditation practice. They're physical postures. So the yama and niyama sort of a framework. The do's and the don'ts are framework of a regulated life to now enter into yoga practice. The yoga practice starts with that asanas or yoga postures. So that's where your physical aspect is sort of brought under control. Now you go from the physical to the life airs, which is subtler than the physical, but it's not as subtle as the mind. Life airs or the breath is more subtle than our physical form, but it's closely connected with our mind. So it's going from the physical, then going to the life airs, pranayam, and trying to control those. Then you go to the mind, which is more subtle than breath and more subtle than your physical form, like that. So it's a progressive. You're progressing through the layers of your being, starting with your physical form to try to ultimately control and connect.
I see. So you don't necessarily meditate on Paramatma while you're in a downward facing dog or something.
No, that's not the intent.
Okay.
It's meant to, in a downward facing dog, you can, but it's not the intention of the yoga practice. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
All right, so let's continue on. So samadhi, in this stage of samadhi, one sees everyone as soul, whether it be an elephant, a dog, a wicked person, looks like he's pretty mean, a very gentle, wise individual, a cow, whatever, a tree. They see each person as a soul, and that everyone has a super soul within them. So in all is a super soul, and super soul is all. This is 3 or 4 verses that Krishna repeatedly says that this is a stage of samadhi. This is a stage of the highest perfection in yoga. And this is such a beautiful verse. For one who sees me everywhere, and sees everything in me. I'm never lost, nor he is ever lost to me. So here we see an intimate relationship of that yoga connection made very strong between the devotee or the spiritual practitioner and Krishna. So here's a picture of how one sees the Supreme everywhere. Imagine, just close your eyes, imagine all political world leaders of today had this vision of seeing everyone as spiritual beings in connection with God. And they see that God is within everyone. How would the world be if all the leaders in the world today had this vision? How would that change our world? Think about it. That's a rhetorical question. There are many stories of Srila Prabhupada, the author of the Bhagavad Gita that we're reading together, or the commentary. I mean, not the author of the Gita itself, but author of the commentary. You know, it was fascinating to study his life and to see how he had this kind of vision. Like, he would see the sun rays coming through the window, and he would say to his students, when you are more advanced, you will feel the sun rays coming through the window as Krishna's embrace. When he would sit on the floor, he would say, I'm sitting on Krishna's hand. When he would see an orange, or, you know, when you would see an orange, he'd open an orange, he would look at the orange, look at this. Such a pretty package has been put together by Krishna. So we have great examples of how one can actually have this kind of vision of seeing Krishna everywhere. And then as a result, you're constantly experiencing love. And the heart is soft, the heart is happy. Everywhere one goes is feeling love and they're happy. It's such a nice realization. This is the benefit of being in the yoga process. Not only that, now your relationships with one another is filled with non-judgmentalism. You can actually empathize deeply. Because here Krishna says, he is a perfect yogi who, by comparison to his own self, sees the true equality of all beings in both their happiness and distress. So even though somebody acts in unbecoming ways, one understands that their behavior is because they have certain pain. Bad behavior is due to pain. And pain is due to lack of love. And a true yogi can see in another person bad behavior, but they don't just see the bad behavior, they see behind the bad behavior is the pain, and they can relate with that pain, because I too have gone through some similar kind of pain. Probably not the same pain, but similar pain. So there's equality. We have equality in one sense, even though others behave in perhaps not so healthy ways. Yeah. So then one can remain non-judgmental. It's a nice feature. It's a nice benefit or nice quality of a yogi. So now Arjuna says, Krishna, what you've discussed is really impractical and unendurable for me. The mind is restless and unsteady. He says, I can't do it. The mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong. 4 different features of the mind that is troublesome. Think about it. Our mind is restless, like it can't stay in one thing. It just needs to keep moving. Like, think about just this 1 hour that we've been together so far. Where all has the mind gone while we're together? Just 1 hour. It's turbulent. Sometimes it gets into these deep depressive states, or these deep or this exuberant excited states, and it's turbulent. It's like a roller coaster. Like going on, I don't know if any of you have been to Six Flags, but it's like being on a big roller coaster in Six Flags. Turbulent. obstinate. You tell your mind, don't think about that, and it'll think exactly about that. And very strong. Despite trying to subdue it, Arjuna said is more difficult to control the mind than controlling wind. I don't know anyone who tries to control wind, but I can't imagine that's easy. But he says it's more difficult to control wind. I'm sorry, control the mind than to control wind. So what does Krishna say? Krishna offers him empathy. And he says, you're right. Oh yeah, sorry, that's a little bit about the mind. Some of you saw this. A mind is like a monkey. This is from another Vedic text. Anyone remember what's the next one? It's not just a monkey. The mind is like a
monkey that was bit.
drunken monkey. Not just a drunken monkey. A drunken monkey stung by a scorpion. Not just a drunken monkey stung by a scorpion. A drunken monkey stung by a scorpion possessed by a ghost. That's our monkey. That's the mind. Oh gosh. That's what we were living with. So Krishna says, I understand. Asamshayam. Asamshayam means without a doubt, it is very difficult to curb the restless mind. So he empathizes, he understands. And then he encourages Arjuna. He says, but it is possible by suitable practice and by detachment. These two things, practice and detachment. So what is the practice and what's the detachment? So this next slide shows that. This is from Saint Chaitanya. He says the easiest way to control the mind, or the practice, is by chanting Hare Krishna, or you could say meditating on the names of the Supreme. And what's the detachment? In all humility. So detaching from a sense of self-importance that's artificial. It's not easy to detach from false ego, but that's the benefit. If one can engage in this practice of chanting the mantra in humility or detaching from false ego, then it can be very easy to control the mind. So that's a mantra. Now Arjuna says, okay, Krishna, I try. You're telling me to practice and become detached, but what if I'm trying and I'm not successful? What happens to me? I take up spiritual life and I'm not successful materially because I'm focusing on my spiritual life. And then I'm not successful spiritually because, oh gosh, look at this mind. Am I like a riven cloud and I don't have material success or spiritual success? What happens? It's a good question. I've had so many people ask me this question in different language, obviously, but it goes back to this ancient question that Arjuna asked Krishna. So Krishna says, such a person does not meet with destruction either in this world or in the spiritual world. After short practice of spiritual life, the soul enters into a planet of pious and they enjoy in some kind of heavenly situation and then take birth again in a righteous or a wealthy family to pick back up where they left off. So if you remember in chapter 2, there was a concept of the spiritual bank account that never diminishes. So after short practice, you pick right back up. After a long practice of spiritual life, if one is quote unsuccessful, in their next life, they're born in a family of great yogis so that they can have a strong environment to, again, pick back right up from where they left in their previous life. So Krishna is telling him, don't worry if you're not successful, you won't like in this life, or not fully successful anyway. Whatever investment you put into your spiritual life is permanent asset and it will continue into your next life. So then Krishna concludes chapter 6 with saying there are different kinds of people. There's a yogi. A yogi is greater than a ascetic. Tapasvi means an ascetic. A jnani means one who pursues knowledge, and a karmi means one who's pursuing dutiful life, just being dutiful in their life. So he said a yogi is greater than these three. You become a yogi, and then he says yogi nam api sarvesham. Very important. Of all the yogis, the bhakti yogi is the topmost. It's very, very clear in the Gita. Of all the yoga practices, Krishna says the yoga, bhakti yoga is the highest. And the way he phrases it, he doesn't say it that way. He says, my opinion, this is God's opinion. He says, my opinion is that bhakti yoga is the highest. So here's a yoga journey. I talked about in the beginning of our discussion. You have conditioned life, and then the beginning of the yoga journey is karma yoga, or yoga of detached work. Then jnana yoga, which is yoga of knowledge. Then dhyana yoga, which we talked about today. Sorry, there's a Y missing there. It should be dhyana yoga, not dana yoga. That's the yoga of meditation, and then ultimately bhakti yoga is at the end of the road of the yoga journey. You could see it as a ladder, or you could see it as a journey of the road. So here's another view of the yoga ladder. It starts with, at the bottom is just do it, animal life. That's many people live in this realm. They don't care about anything higher, just live life moment to moment, and do what feels right, period. That's animal life. And then it's karmakanda, or some kind of regulated life. And now this up here is the yoga process. We start with karma yoga to jnana yoga to dhyana yoga, and ultimately to bhakti yoga. Another vision of the 4 yoga processes: as one's clarity of the goal increases and as the purity of motivation increases, the type of yoga that one practices changes. This is called the yoga matrix. Yep, that's it. So that's the end of our presentation of chapter 6, where Krishna concludes. It's a very important chapter because this is the end of the first 6 chapters of the Gita. The Gita is divided into 3 sections: the first 6, the next 6, and the last 6. It's 18 chapters. So 18 divided by 3 is 6 chapters. So we ended chapter 6 today. Krishna ends with this message of be a yogi, like practice yoga, and of all the yoga practices, practice bhakti yoga. Now, how do you practice bhakti yoga? What does bhakti yoga look like? Chapters 7 through 12 is all about bhakti yoga. And then this is like the 7 to 12 is like the cream of the sandwich. You might have bread on both sides, and the real stuff that make the sandwich is in the middle. So the middle 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, the most precious, the most meaningful. Okay, so I'll pause there and see if any more reflections or comments or questions that you'd like to bring up from the second half that we covered.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely excited about the next part where we're gonna talk about Bhakti Yoga. But that analogy about the mind and the intoxicated monkey stung by a scorpion possessed by ghosts. I mean, this is something else, because I've heard like the mind being compared to a monkey, but in this case, I mean, it's like some next level deal, I mean, if this is what we're dealing with, I don't know what to say. I mean, yeah, is this a part of some kind of Vedic scripture or?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And it sounds like even though it sounds like a little bit of exaggeration, if you study it, it actually it almost gives you actually makes sense. You're like, oh yeah, it does make sense. It's like it's, at the same time it's the perfect it sounds abstract, but at the same time it sounds like the perfect description, you know. It's just yeah. But yeah, I mean yeah, that's what I was just wanted to say basically.
Yeah,
I was
sure.
kind
Thank
of
you for
surprised
sharing
by
that.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll send you a picture of that monkey. You can blow it up and put it on your wall. You might like that.
Yeah, I might find a lot of things in common with that monkey too. Yeah.
I'm just teasing you. All right. Any other comment or question?
Actually, I do have a question before I forget. In the very beginning, when we were first doing the meditation,
Yeah.
you said, just close your eyes halfway, and you did say something like, like focus on your nose or something, but
Stare at the tip of your nose.
yes. Why that as opposed to closing your eyes? I had a tendency of closing my eyes.
Oh, that's a great question. No harm completely closing your eyes. In fact, it is, if you can sustain that without sleeping, that's great. The idea behind it, I can show you where it says in the Gita, but I'll just say it. The idea behind half closed eyes for the yogi is so that if you fully close your eyes, you can fall asleep. There's risk of falling asleep. And if you keep your eyes open, then there's risk of being distracted of what's going on outside. You know, like how the mind works, Uktain, you probably have more experience than me on this, but how the mind works when we observe the mind is you'll see, let's say you have your eyes open, you're meditating. You might see a squirrel cross. And then the mind will go to, I know my mind has done this. It's like, squirrel just crossed. And it's winter time. Why is the squirrel crossing? I wonder if the squirrel is feeling cold. Does the squirrel have family? Is it living in that tree? I wonder what our neighbors would say if we have a lot of squirrels on our tree. I don't like those neighbors. Maybe we should move to a different place. Which place should I go to? I don't know. Maybe I should move to Texas. That's just a warmer climate. Yeah, warm. I sweat a lot. I become old. I sweat a lot. Oh my goodness. I become old. So all of a sudden, I saw a squirrel passing by, and now I'm thinking about being old, right? And completely distracted. So there's a danger of having the eyes open, and there's a risk of also having the eyes closed, and therefore the prescription by Krishna is you have half closed eyes. That makes sense?
Yes, and with those half closed eyes, you want us to do bhakti yoga.
This is how you perform Ashtanga yoga. In bhakti yoga, there's less stricture around these things. But because we were doing a guided meditation in the beginning, it was only 5 minutes. I was leading you to do that just to experience a potential way that you can try to practice meditation. That's all. It's not a necessity.
Is it possible to feel more connected with the Supreme Soul in that meditation as opposed to bhakti yoga? Is it possible?
If one is feeling connection where the heart is invested in that process, then that is bhakti yoga. Because bhakti yoga is its essence principle. It's not so much an external practice. It is certainly external practices, but it's also an essence principle. So if I'm practicing this Ashtanga yoga process with my heart in it, then it has a component of bhakti in it. You get the point?
Yeah, that really made so much sense to me because I was very confused with the two practices.
Yeah. So in fact, the great sages speak about this, that any of those yoga processes, either be it karma yoga, jnana yoga, dhyana yoga, ashtanga yoga, these processes can become successful because they will have the component of bhakti in them, the component of devotion, the component of dedication and determination in them. Yeah. So maybe we have a couple of minutes left. We can maybe share some takeaways. I'll call you. What are you taking away from today? Chetna's PC or Nilesh, would you like to? What's your takeaway?
My takeaway is that, like everything in life, it's all of this is a lot of work, and you got to be persistent, and you're going to put time and energy into it to get what you want to get out of it.
Yeah. Bhukti, would you like to share a takeaway?
Yes, I love bhakti yoga. I love chanting. But I also love the supreme connection, the yoga where I feel like I have such an experience and I have such supreme connection with the Supreme Lord. So there's two different feelings. Both are equally connected, but sometimes one is a little more connected. It just feels more different. It feels like a deeper connection.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can understand that.
Sure, and it's a very subjective experience, and follow the thread of the connection.
Bhakti yoga is fun. It's fun. It's a big party to me. Like a party in my head with God. But the other one is a little bit more just a straight connection, like straight Wi-Fi, straight there. I don't know.
That's great. That's what you want. I mean, that's a goal of bhakti too. That's feeling that connection. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Keshav, would you like to share a takeaway? Oh, maybe he disappeared. Kusum, would you like to share a takeaway?
I think I'm really very in the beginning of a lot of this stuff. So just like what Nilesh said, just be persistent, keep getting at it.
Yeah. There's a lot, right? There's probably a lot of information in a short amount of time.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, well, I thank you all. We're at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Thanks, guys, for participating today. And we'll pick back up next week. Prakash will do chapter 7. So this is the starting of the Bhakti Yoga section. All right, take care. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much, and you have a
Thank
nice
you very
week
much.
too.